It's no secret that video games have changed drastically over the years. You know, what we play, how we play, who we play with, the worlds we get ourselves lost in, and the trends we see in games. I mean, even the way games are marketed, monetized, and consumed have changed. One massive change that I find interesting to think about and discuss is how games are released now versus how they used to be, because of how drastically different it's all become. And I'm not talking about the rise of digital games over CDs and cartridges. I'm talking about the fact that a lot of games nowadays don't seem to just release anymore and that's it. You know what I'm talking about, right? Updates, bug patches, drip feeds of content, missing content, DLCs, etc. But to understand how we got here, I'll be taking you all on a journey to how things used to be and where it all began before we really dissect the issues with modern video game releases. Let's not go all the way back, but let's start here, during the rise of home consoles and arcades. Video games were becoming more accessible to the public, and with that came a streamlined process of releasing these games. Developers worked on their games, tried to make them as problem-free as possible, released their game through a publisher, and that was that. No fixes needed. If there were issues, oh well, we'll get them next time. However, there were revisions for games, like for example, the many versions of the arcade and home variants of Street Fighter II. Regarding arcade games, they were generally made to be purposefully difficult, making them hard to master, giving players limited lives before needing to hit continue, meaning that players had to spend more coin to continue playing and for arcades to make profits. High scores also played into making profit. Getting your high score on a machine like Donkey Kong or Pac-Man was a feat in itself. I personally had some sort of high score when I was a kid at my local place's Galaga machine. Considering that I only got up to, something like level 3, I don't think anyone playing it was that good. Also, arcade machines has some nice two-player capabilities that pitted players against each other fighting for better scores and/or fighting to beat each other. So naturally, some of this culture transferred to home console games like pitting players against each other, the life counter system, some of the difficulty, etc., all without the need to pay with quarters and wait your turn in a public setting. You just needed to buy a console, the games you wanted, and hope that your brothers would actually stop playing when they said they would, but then they kept playing, and then I was also at fault for doing this, and it was a vicious cycle of complaining to our parents, but then they're great memories and experiences I will truly treasure for the rest of my life. But anyway, consoles. Same thing here regarding publishing games. The game had glitches? Oh well, we'll get them next time. They couldn't be updated. How would you run an update through a cartridge like this? I mean, come on. Look at it. All that could be done was to revise the game, put that into production, and then onto the market. A good example of this is the region differences for Super Mario 64 on the Nintendo 64, specifically the Shindao version released in Japan 1997 that controversially removes the backwards long jump and changes up other things. And then from here, CD-ROMs were king in delivering games to home consoles. Handheld consoles still used a mix of cartridges and CDs, and eventually, internet connectivity made its way into console gaming. Clearly, PC gaming already had this. Not only was it used to play games with other people, but we went from floppy disks to CDs and now games that you can digitally download and only play online. And this is where the first known recorded instance of a loot box can be found. 2004, a little MMORPG game called Maple Story, specifically the Japanese version. Players could buy gachapon tickets priced at 100 yen each, and players would get a random in-game item when they used the ticket at a gachapon. In real life, these are capsule toy machines that disperse a capsule with a random item in it from a pool of items. So they were incorporated into the game just like that. And for context, 100 yen is around 77 US cents and around 242 drachma. There was also a similar system implemented into another MMORPG called Zhong 2 Online that was released in China back in 2006. It allowed players to open treasure chests with random rewards for real-life money. But this was the small start for Eastern audiences. For Western audiences, we had Team Fortress 2, one of the most OG character-based shooters, implementing loot boxes in a 2010 update. Oh, and I didn't point this out, but in case it wasn't obvious, things could now be updated into games. Granted, long before Team Fortress 2, but this was a way for developers to get new ideas out for their games post-release, or give a reason for people to buy expansions or subscriptions. Something similar was happening on consoles, but more in the form of DLCs and season passes, since the MMO genre didn't really translate to these platforms around this time. But I won't touch on consoles too much here. What I want to talk about are mobile and browser games. Monetization zoomed its way into these games when companies realized that they could make big profits off of time savers. These games are usually sold for free and are made to take up your time and thought space due to their slow progression, daily logins, limited time quest rewards, events, etc. But you could just spend some money to progress and complete things quicker. One of the biggest instances of this that hit the mainstream market was Farmville in 2009. It had it all and could be played on Facebook's gaming service, which in hindsight, I'm very happy that my parents didn't let me have a Facebook account, because I would have been playing trash like this and neglecting time I would have been spending playing masterpieces on the Xbox 360. But here is where I think we can definitely say that this time period here was the tipping point. Whoa, where did that statistic come from? Wow. Predatory mechanics and microtransactions had made their way into video games, but it got a whole lot worse around the early to mid 2010s. Companies started to realize that they could just release a free-to-play game that hooks people in at the start with solid progression and rewards, and then completely get rid of that for a system that rewards players much slower and nudges them into paying for in-game items and boosters if they want to progress faster. Not only that, but around this time, games started to release in some not so satisfactory conditions. Glitches, bugs, you name it were off the walls for so many of these games. But don't get me wrong, this sort of stuff in video games has always been around to varying degrees, but it felt different this time around. It felt like more and more games were popping up with issues on release. And these weren't minor or fun glitches, these were game breaking and immersion breaking. It was clear that these games needed more time in development. I'd say that the biggest culprits of this stuff was from publishers like EA Games, the worst company in America rated by consumerists for 2012 and 2013, and Ubisoft. I also feel like we can add Activision Blizzard into the mix too. Here, let me name some of the disasters that struck around this time. 2014, Watch Dogs, an average game that was revealed to look like this, but ended up looking like this. It's nothing crazy, it just didn't meet expectations. 2014, Assassin's Creed Unity. Here we go, the biggest mess of an Assassin's Creed game we've ever seen. I mean, just look at this stuff, honestly. 2014, Microsoft's Halo Master Chief Collection. A fantastic collection crippled by its terrible servers on launch and for years to come. 2014 was not a hot year for video games. Let's move on to 2015, Studio Wildcard's Ark Survival Evolved, an unoptimized game that couldn't even run properly on the best PC rigs on release. 2016, Hello Games No Man's Sky, a game that was incorrectly advertised by Sean Murray, one of the company's founders, and then myself and so many others were hyped for a game that didn't deliver on release. 2017, DICE's Star Wars Battlefront 2. It was released with a terrible progression system that would force players into playing the game for hours on end if they wanted to unlock the characters and upgrades they wanted. Or you could spend money on top of the money you spent buying the game to unlock this stuff quickly. 2018, Bethesda's Fallout 76. It was buggy and below average on release, and it was very clear to players that it needed a few more years in development. Oh, but we can't forget 2020, CD Projekt Red's Cyberpunk. We all remember the terrible release that this game had. It was an unpolished disaster and was advertised strategically to hide the fact. It was so bad that refunds were being offered to players who had bought the game digitally. Now 2021, DICE's Battlefield 2042. Oh my goodness, this game had one of the worst FPS launches of all time. We're talking bugs, cringe, a lack of content and basic features. A below average experience for all, and the player count really reflects that. Now what's the common trend that started to gain traction thanks to these games and so many others? The creation of good marketing, releasing a half-baked game, patching it over the years after release, and adding some sort of microtransactions to the game to maximize profits. The twisted part is that developers don't even need to patch their games or release more content for it. You bought their game and they've made their money. And if you pre-ordered their game, well, what does that tell them? More pre-orders, more money, even though the game isn't out yet and people don't know how good the game will be, more problems for the consumer. But regardless, it would definitely hurt developers and publishers' revenue and reputation in the long run if they didn't update their messy games. But they still don't have to since they made their money. As long as they don't go full cyberpunk, but this is obviously a massive detriment to us players. Here's a unique case. Let's go back to 2010, Square Enix's Final Fantasy XIV, an MMORPG. This game received so much negativity and outrage from reviewers and players that the only way to save the game was to shut it down with a world-ending in-game event that disconnected players and then played a cutscene. This cataclysmic event destroyed everything, and from there, a new Final Fantasy XIV would be developed in 2.5 years. This gave us an extremely well-received and successful Final Fantasy XIV, A Realm Reborn. I recently started playing this and I love it so much. So much so that I've put many of my single-player games I've been playing on the back burner. The other games I've mentioned have done similar things to Final Fantasy XIV. Not to the same extent, but pretty similar. Patch after patch to fix bugs, content drop after content drop to add content that should have been in the game from the start for all of them. My favorite example from what I pointed out is definitely No Man's Sky and Cyberpunk 2077. No Man's Sky released as a below-average game that was missing a lot of content that was shown and said to be in it. The game has been continually updated since release to fix bugs and add content that should have been in the game on release, and a little more. Well, way more actually. When the game first launched, I played it for 2 weeks and then never again, until the game was updated a bunch and I jumped back in every 2 years or so. And you know, it would have been ideal if the game launched in the state it should have, but that's a whole other issue about deadlines and game publishers. Now, Cyberpunk 2077? That was some hype marketing. This 40-minute gameplay trailer right here, it sold me and thousands of other people on the game. And then we all played the game and... yeah! Well, years later and the game is still being updated, bugs are being patched and the game is getting an expansion in 2023. It's funny, on release, I thought the game was a 4 out of 10 due to the glitches it had, how it ran. My old computer was low spec to today's standards, but the game shouldn't have ran as badly as it did, and because of the story content that was and wasn't there. But then I picked it up again after I bought a new PC in late 2022 because I was reminded of its existence thanks to this little show over here. And man, I had an absolute blast. It pretty much bumped it up to an 8 or a 9 out of 10 for me, making it one of my favorite games of all time. I don't even really know how, but I think the game pulled through. So what's the lesson in all of this? Release a game, update it over time, make an anime about the game, have people remember about the game, and then jump back into it. One thing I should also mention that's pretty much becoming a norm is that so many games have launched with disastrous monetization schemes. I pointed out Star Wars Battlefront 2, but didn't mention that the game's loot box monetization system was overhauled post-release. Loot boxes were here to stay, but they could no longer be purchased with real money. They had to be earned through daily logins and gameplay. Now this was done because it was so bad and created so much backlash. I think we can all agree that loot boxes are a pretty lousy excuse for a progression system due to it being a form of gambling, even if that progression system is usually related to cosmetic progression like weapon and character skins. Do you remember Overwatch 1? Ah yes, when the Overwatch series somehow had a better progression system when it focused on loot boxes as opposed to a trash battle pass in its sequel? On launch, the system focused on you leveling up and getting a loot box for doing so. And of course, you could pay for some, and of course, players like myself and thousands of others sure did. You could also get Overwatch coins from the boxes or from getting duplicates of what you already have that can be spent on buying the cosmetics you wanted to. Trends change, and we've moved from loot boxes because of their social and legal gambling controversies to the dreaded Battle Pass. Every game and its mother needs a battle pass for some reason. A predatory progression system that feeds on the fear of missing out by putting a time limit on what you can unlock. Match that with the slow grind needed to finish it, average and unengaging challenges, and lackluster rewards that you need to get through to reach what you really want on the pass, and you have yourself an unfulfilling time waster. I think we can all agree that Fortnite pioneered and popularized this system despite Dota 2 being regarded as the game to first have a battle pass system. Using Overwatch as an example again, specifically Overwatch 2, yes! They too wanted to screw over consumers by removing the loot box leveling up system to make way for the battle pass level up system. It really does say a lot when people miss your old loot box system over your new battle pass system. Oh boy! Each season has a battle pass to grind for, and of course, it's not just cosmetics that are in here, because of course it isn't. It's new characters too. If you, yes you, don't slave away playing this watered down sequel, too bad. You'll unlock the character once the season is over. That's such an awesome feature for a game that relies on counterpicking enemy heroes. Oh, and now they have a store full of expensive bundles for cosmetics. Yeah. To add even more salt to the wound, we can't forget their account migration screw-ups. My PS4 account with cosmetics that I earned and bought alongside with my brother? Gone. Didn't migrate over to PC properly, and now we have an empty account. I doubt that anything will ever be done about it either, and I highly doubt that my brother and I were the only ones to go through something like this. To all my homies who've had their accounts nuked, I feel for you. Our baddie skins will be missed. Speaking of battle passes, did you know that Halo Infinite has a battle pass system too? Except their one has no time limit on when you need to complete it. Hooray! You just need to bear the terrible challenges the game throws at you to level it up. This stuff is just awful. It's so anti-consumer. And this is where we're at. It just keeps happening and getting worse, and are you ready for this? It's crazy, but what if we wanted the best of all worlds? Loot boxes, battle passes, and an online store. Well, give it up for Diablo Immortal. Oh boy, all of these are here for lucky players to spend money on once the game's progression slows down to a crawl. And okay, the game doesn't have loot boxes in the traditional sense, but it has a similar feature in an area of the game called Elder Rifts where you kill monsters and maybe get a good reward. This area came under intense controversy when a Twitch streamer known as Quinn spent around 25,000 New Zealand dollars, which roughly translates to 15,000 US dollars, and around 5 million drachma, just so he could get his first 5 out of 5 star gem, which would help max out his character. I don't need to explain to you why spending that much money on a game is a bad idea, and why it's also a terrible design choice if someone spends that much to get one item. You can even use a simulator by Dimi777 on GitHub that I'll have linked in the description that lets you simulate how long it might take to get a 5 out of 5 star gem. Ooh, that's grim. Other games have had this trifecta of monetization too, like Realm of the Mad God, the game I talked about in my last video. And now, we get into the consequences of all of this and the state of video game releases. We as consumers have been conditioned to be skeptical about how a game releases and how it'll try and suck up our time and money. Not because of some minor hiccups, but because of games releasing in poor states over and over and over again. And this hinders a player's overall experience when picking up the game during the initial release. How many people pick up games and then never again because of what's offered on launch? Or never even pick up the game because of content that's in it that isn't related to the gameplay or story? This is detrimental for any game, but multiplayer games are a special kind of exception in the fact that they're multiplayer and are struck hardest with predatory mechanics. Why can't a big multiplayer game launch anymore with the game modes and features previous ones have had? It's like what the recent Call of Duties have done or what Halo has done. Drip feeding content. This is a terrible practice in which a game is launched without everything expected, like a wide variety of game modes, options, maps, etc. found in other games of that genre or that series of games. And then that stuff is slowly added to the game every month or so. What a great way to kill off hype for a game, especially if updates are slow. This also fits into the whole games as a live service system where a game is continuously updated with new content over its lifespan. The argument for this type of content is that players get new stuff to do every so often, and it works very well for the MMO genre and free-to-play market. But with other genres, games were released with way more content and variety years ago and we didn't get bored. We don't need stuff gatekept from us. If the gameplay, story, and capabilities of a game are solid, those foundations will shine brightest when loss of playability and freedom is given to the players. But no, it's easier to just release a game with half-baked ideas, a lack of content, and too many microtransactions with plans to continuously drip-feed new content through the games as a service model. So where does this leave us? It leaves us with profits over fun. Games that launch with bare bones content, are unpolished, and shove microtransactions in your face with patches and new content being added in the future. And thanks to the internet, developers can easily update their games and tweak whatever they want. Predatory game mechanics have taken over too. I covered a few of the playtime related ones already, and maybe I'll cover more in a future video because I think it's an important topic for people to be aware of, especially since time is such a finite resource in our day and age. And I think this topic is important too, the release of modern video games, you know, how the landscape has changed overall and what the future may hold. We've definitely seen a decline in quality in certain aspects, no doubt, but there are still developers out there that make games out of passion. The rise of indie games has been a great example of that. Some absolute masterpieces have been made by small teams, and I can't just say that all AAA developers make hot garbage as well, because that's definitely not true at all. But that leaves us in an environment where developers and publishers, mainly publishers, will try to take advantage of their customers. I know it sounds a bit dramatic, or I'm making it sound like a life-threatening situation, but genuinely, don't fall for their tactics because in the end, we're where we are today with modern games because we, as a majority, give into and accept these practices and features. They'll keep doing what they can get away with, and it makes me yearn for the times of the past. But the present is now, and all we can do is look to the future. And with that being said, that's been me. Thanks for watching the video, and I hope you enjoyed it and the new style of content I'm trying to make. Iceberg videos are great and all, but I'm definitely a bit burnt out from them. So expect some more other styles of essay content in the future. And here's a massive thanks to my patrons. You're all legends and your support is greatly appreciated. So with that being said, I'll catch you in the next one.